So everybody, thanks for taking time out of your busy day today to join us for another Workshop Wednesday. Today's event is, I think you'll find it very interesting. It talks about a new feature within FleetCommander that starts to get into total cost of ownership. So just to set the stage a little bit, I think a lot of you folks that are familiar with FleetCommander know that, we've typically had, capabilities to deal with maintenance in fundamentally fuel. And so as you got into, working with your vehicles, there was kind of a chunk of information that, was missing about all other vehicle expenses. So one of the things that we've done is we've been working to bring some additional functionality into FleetCommander that's going to be part of core. And it's going to allow you to manage total cost of ownership. So with that, I will get into, kind of a presentation of the slide. So, before we get into it again, just for folks that may be new to this, Workshop Wednesday is a monthly session that we hold.
Hey, Joe.
Fundamental.
If you'll go ahead and share your screen for us, please.
Oh, geez, that would be good. Sorry about that. Thanks for telling me that. I apologize. Can you guys see that now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, sorry about that. So, as I mentioned, Workshop Wednesday, it's our monthly session. We really look to you, our clients, for content. So typically when we send out a survey, we ask you how you're doing with FleetCommander, whether you need help, whether you're okay, whether you're a super user. And part and parcel to that, we ask you where you think you'd like to have some additional information. And so all of the sessions that we've done to date have been guided by that premise. So we certainly appreciate your feedback, and we hope that you'll respond to our surveys. I think if you look at the chat, within the meeting right now, you'll see that there's a link to our survey, and we would certainly appreciate you taking that. It takes but a moment or two, and it'll help us guide future content. Okay. Webinars, again, they're the third Wednesday of every month from 2 to 3 Eastern. So we hope that's a convenient time. If we get folks that say, gee, I can't make it, we would certainly look to change the date. But fundamentally, that seems to be working well for everybody that, based on what we know. So for those of you attending today, thanks so much. We do record this every month. So that's something that you can expect. If you do sign up for the webinar, we will send you a copy of the recording and the slides by link. It's typically sent out, within 24 hours of the meeting. Video, use of your video camera is optional, and we do ask everybody to, have their mics muted so that there's no interference in the background. And with that, one last question or one last item is, if you do want to ask questions during the webinar, please use the Teams chat window. So for those of you that are familiar with Teams, at the very top of the message, at the very top of the Teams panel, you'll see a little bubble that looks like a, kind of a comment. You can click on that, and that'll open up a little menu, and you can type in, who you are and what your question is, and we'll keep track of that and do our best to answer those during the session. Okay. So today we've got a great little feature. It's called FleetCommander Total Cost of Ownership, and so this is something that was, recently as part of the next release of FleetCommander. And it's going to delve into TCO, how we've approached it, understanding the tools, the configuration, using it, and then further enhancements that we're planning. So that's the agenda today, as well as then any of your questions and answers along the way. Okay. So first, total cost of ownership. Let's decide what it is. So fundamentally, when you think about total cost of ownership, you need to think about it as a framework. And so if you use total cost of ownership, you can compare really any type of asset, so whether it's vehicles or equipment, in addition to any other types of asset classes, to compare overall performance. And so again, when I ran my fleet, total cost of ownership was really, really important to me. I was always trying to achieve the lowest total cost of ownership for the vehicles that I put on the road to achieve a certain mission. And by doing that, you drive, fundamentally, you drive the lowest operating cost of your fleet. By understanding what TCO is, you can identify all the costs, whether they're direct or indirect, and then any special costs that are associated with either the purchase or the ongoing operation of the vehicle. So the nice thing about TCO is it's really asset independent, right? You can use it to level the playing field, to allow for direct comparison of similar assets. So as long as you're getting comparability around the asset base, if you're operating, light duty vehicles, whether they're vans or pickups, you can have vans or pickups from a variety of manufacturers. And TCO provides you with valuable information there because it'll help you best determine what is the lowest total operating cost, total cost of ownership for that vehicle over its intended life and its intended use. So, what TCO is at the end of the day, it's really looking at the sum of your net acquisition costs, your direct and indirect operating expenses, any incidental costs that you've got, any disposal and salvage, that are necessary to support that vehicle over its life. So again, it's really important when you do TCO that you have a starting point and you have an ending point, and you understand that on the starting point, you know what the costs are. How did you buy it? How did you procure it? How much money did you spend for it? And again, that's a net capital cost. And then the back end, you always want to evaluate, the disposal based on any salvage. So, if you're leaving things out of the equation, you're going to get erroneous TCO. And again, it helps you operate your fleet in the most efficient way possible based on your requirements. And it helps you understand the real costs of operating your assets. So that's why TCO is expensive. I should say not expensive, but it is important. Okay. So when you think about TCO, your asset is the center of the universe, right? And these are kind of the bubbles in the ownership drivers of the asset. You've got fixed operating costs, you've got variable non-operating costs, you've got your acquisition costs, you've got incidental costs, and you've got disposal and salvage value. And so all of these play a really important aspect in terms of determining what TCO is for your selected, population of vehicles. Excuse me. Okay. So getting into the tool. So, as we thought about TCO within Agile, we wanted to have a flexible approach to managing TCO, understanding that TCO can be very different for each of our clients. And not so much in the kinds of things that go into TCO, but fundamentally what you call them. So people may call the same thing differently, within their operation. And we wanted to make sure that we had a tool that was flexible enough to accommodate, everybody's needs. So, when we went in and developed the tool within FleetCommander, our job was to develop really a core capability within the application that allows you to create, capture, and report, on a variety of, vehicle expense types, that are underneath the fixed operating, non-operating, incidental, and acquisition costs. In our model, what we've done is we've created expense types that have parent categories and child categories. So when you think about the parent categories, you're looking at that fixed operating, non-operating type of expense. And then as you get into the child categories, you're thinking about things that roll up into that. So if you were looking at fixed expense, one thing may be insurance. That could be a fixed expense for you, right? If you're looking at, operating expenses, you could have things like, maintenance or fuel or something else. So, we'll get into it a little bit further, but fundamentally that's what we're allowing you to do, is really get into the categorization of those assets. Or I should say of those expense types. So, as we've said, we've got, a little bit of flexibility in terms of how we're defining them, okay, whether it's fixed, operating, incidental. And then we've got configurable expense types as well. So all of these things roll into the overall TCO model, that are measured against the vehicle and then reported on globally. Some of the other changes that we made in terms of the application are, we've modified the asset tab within FleetCommander. So now, as you get into the release, and again, this is in 5.9, you'll be able to see a tab on the vehicle profile that has TCO in it. And that's going to be a standard feature of the system. And you can see that the other thing that we've done is TCO now incorporates data from maintenance and fuel. So previously, when you think about, how FleetCommander dealt with maintenance and fuel costs, typically you had maintenance costs over here and fuel costs over there, and there was never really a way where you could aggregate that data. The introduction of TCO alleviates that problem, and it brings those costs into, this one centralized repository where it's going to help you manage, monitor, and report on the activity of your vehicle. So it should be a very, very powerful tool at the end of the day. We've added a default maintenance account in there as well to handle that posting. And we've also made another change, which is adding an account code field on the asset. So one of the things that we didn't have on the asset previously was an account code. And so, many times when folks are doing things about, expenses or expense management, they want to post it to specific accounts, or the vehicle may have to roll up into a specific account. And so we've created that, to bring some additional depth on the reporting side, to the expense process. Some other great things about this is we've added both a manual entry interface. So again, you can create records in TCO either manually, or, we've also implemented a generic import. So FleetCommander now has, a nice, generic import that you can aggregate your data into and then just upload into FleetCommander. So, very, very powerful tool, and we'll get into all of that stuff. And then lastly, one of the things that, we're finalizing, we have a little bit in here, is a cost allocation tool for calculating and adding, various fixed or overhead type items. So one of the challenges that folks get into with, managing their vehicles is, they need to apportion costs for that vehicle, whatever that vehicle is, right? In some cases, people say, I want to apply a standard monthly charge for insurance. It's pretty typical. Or I've got the fleet department, and it's, consists of a number of people, that support the fleet, and I have to liquidate that cost, to make sure that my vehicles are fully burdened. So we've got, we're going to be, we've got that capability as well. And then the other thing that's really going to be coming out, in the very next release is a way to handle replacement fund. So, for all of you folks out there that do have to do something with, replacement fund, or want to do something with replacement fund to truly understand the cost of your assets, FleetCommander is going to, have a way where you can calculate replacement fund on a monthly basis. So some really, really great stuff coming down the road, as well as in the release. So let's talk a little bit about the total cost of ownership structure. So, as I mentioned, we've aggregated the data in a couple of different ways. First and foremost is, we've got high level categories of, broad expenses. So fixed expenses, operating expenses, non-operating, incidental, and acquisition. So when you look at that, think of those as parent expense types. And then things in the subcategories would potentially roll up into it. So, if you've got, things like insurance, depreciation, or overhead, and you look at and you want to know how much fixed cost your vehicle has, you've got a way where you can run that. So you have a way where all of those subcategories can roll into that fixed expense. Same thing for operating, non-operating, incidental, and acquisition. So, the nice thing is that as we get into this, we've got, a way where we can handle both default types and custom types. And that's really important. So when you start thinking about your business, you may say, the default gets me 80, 90% there, but I've got these other categories that I need to map into. Not a problem. FleetCommander will allow you to create custom expense types that will allow you to map your data into the respective category. So that's a really nice feature, very simple. It's kind of a rigid model. So we're trying to make it as bulletproof as we can in terms of, your interaction with the system and what the system can do for you ultimately. So getting into a little bit of the configuration now, when we talk about managing the subcategories. So the important thing to remember is the main category codes are fixed, right? As we think about what those categories are, fixed, operating, non-operating, incidental, acquisition, et cetera. When we think about those, we've we've looked at, the guidance from NAFA in terms of how they define, some of these categories on the fleet side and think that those make a lot of sense. And there, really aren't many other categories or any other categories really out there. What we've done is we've given you then the ability on the subcategory side, apart from what's there by default, to add in custom, subcategories to support your business. So in the example here, you may have something that's, either, license plate, tag, title, etc. So you've got a way where you could identify it as a specific category. In your world, that might be non-operating. You might decide that it's operating, right? But fundamentally, what it's going to do is you're going to select the category that it rolls into. You're going to give it a name, you're going to give it a code, and then you're going to give it a type and then a description. Excuse me. And so, the other two things are sort order and making it active. So sort order is important. So if you have a list, a lot of you that are familiar with FleetCommander, you'll know that sort order is used throughout the application. And what it does is it gives you a way when you look at a table of data where you can have the field values show up in a certain order. So it typically goes low to high. So the lowest value is at the top, the highest value is at the bottom. Okay. So you can kind of tweak, in what order your selections appear. And then by making it active or not, then tells the system whether it's something that you can interact with. Okay. So again, that's a pretty typical feature in FleetCommander. Now, after we've gone in and created, category, or I should say subcategories, this is an example of what the TCO tab looks like. And as you can see, there's a lot of information here. And so the nice thing about the tab is, when you look at a vehicle, you can do some pretty easy, analysis about what your vehicle is. So you can filter it based on a category or a subcategory, right? So when you get into this, so if you want to show everything, you can do that. When you look at subcategories, you can do that. And it kind of gives you that ability to do, lots of different just analysis here, from a filtering standpoint. So if you're looking for a specific type of transaction against a vehicle, it's an easy way to do some very quick analytics about what's going on in the vehicle in terms of cost. Okay. And again, as you think about what's, this presentation today and how you run your business, we would love to hear from you about, gee, this really is great. It would be better if we could do maybe this, that, or the other thing. So please send us your feedback. We really want to hear from you. Okay. And the other thing I want to show you here is that as you think about, this screen, this is where you can create a manual entry. So by clicking the Add TCO entry button, it's going to bring up a blank record where you can put something into it. Okay. So you can pick the category, the subcategory, the quantity, the cost, etc. All right. Now, again, we talked a little bit about just a moment ago, adding that single entry, when we go into that. And here's what the form looks like. So, by clicking add an entry, it brings you up a blank form, it basically defaults to the vehicle that you're in. It gives you can see the asterisk field, those are required. So anything with an asterisk are required. And so the vehicle, the date, the category, a description is optional, an invoice number is optional because not everybody has it, but basically a quantity rate. Now, the nice thing about this is that as you get into this, the form is designed to be cyclical. So what that means is that, if you've got 5 transactions for this vehicle, you can create one, save it, add another, add another, add another, add another. So again, it gives you that ability to kind of rapidly input data. Okay. And that's just one way to handle it. Again, talking about it, we'll get into the import in a minute or so. Now, when you think about the configuration of this, we've tried to make it really easy because, again, everybody kind of manages their fleet a little bit differently. Okay. So there are 3 ways where you can set the system up to look at your data. You can either do it by VIN. So that's the default setting within FleetCommander. You can do it by asset name or by license number. And again, this is a system-wide. So again, a system admin feature underneath enterprise settings. And so again, you've got the ability where you can say, I want to, import my data based on asset name because that's what makes the most sense. In this case, what we're seeing here is we're seeing also some information below where we say, I want to charge, a monthly insurance rate, $1,500. And again, we can decide some other parameters, so whether that cost is per vehicle or divided equally among all the active vehicles in the fleet. Or if we've got an overhead charge, we can say by vehicle or divided equally among all the vehicles in the fleet. So that's really important because when you start thinking about, things like insurance as an example, in my world, when I managed, my fleet, we were basically self-insured. And so what we would do is we would look at our loss history every year, and then we would determine, what the rates are going forward. And then we would true the accounts up so that we would have enough money in the reserve accounts, as things changed. And so what this does is this allows you to kind of do the same thing where you can look at this and you could say, gee, I want to charge every vehicle in the fleet, $100 a month. Or I want to charge them $10,000 because that's the monthly charge and I want to allocate it amongst all the active vehicles. So you've got two real different ways to handle that. And they're both very, very powerful, and it kind of makes your life really, really easy. Okay. The next one is, so getting into the file. So as we start thinking about the file, we've done a couple of things. So first of all, for those of you that have access to the support portal, we've made a sample file available on the support portal for you folks to look at. So, we'd certainly recommend that you go off and take a look at it. You can see that there's two versions of it. There's a text version and an Excel version. Certainly pick the one that makes the most sense for you. And you can see that the way that the text is created, it's a tab delimited file. So, just make sure that you pay attention to, kind of the little details on how that file is created, whether you're using text or whether you're using just an XLS. Okay. Now, the other piece of the file is as we get into, thinking about the structure, you can see that it's a pretty powerful tool because it gives us the ability to bring a lot of different data into the system. So the nice thing about it is that when you think about the file, if you've got a lot of data that you're trying to get a hold of, I apologize, there's a little bit of noise in the background. If you're trying to bring a lot of data into the system, the file is the way to go, because what it does is it allows you to bring in, 4 different vehicles, different TCO categories and subcategories. Fundamentally the subcategory is what's required because it automatically maps to the category. So you can have a very large file with lots and lots of transactions that you can, just fundamentally import into the system very quickly and very easily. And the reason why this was designed this way was, a lot of our clients, have other systems where they may be booking transactions into from a payable standpoint, and it allows them to take that data out in some format, do a little bit of manipulation to it, add in the right category codes or subcategory codes, and then import it into FleetCommander pretty quickly and easily. So the important thing to remember here is that the import file is the structured way where you can bring in large quantities of data into FleetCommander pretty quickly and easily. And it's a fixed file. So again, you can't change the way the file is structured, okay? You can't, if you get into this and you say, gee, I don't really have an account number, so I'm going to delete that column. You can't, right? So all the columns have to be within the file. We'll get into a little bit more of that. So that's the important thing. And again, here, we've provided some little file import tips. So, don't edit the header row. So the header row is the header row is the header row, right? So when you take a copy of the files from the support portal, you'll see that they're structured a specific way. Don't change the order because it'll cause the file to fail. Don't change the number of columns in it. Don't delete columns, don't add columns, etc. Right? If you think that some other things are required, you should reach out to us and we'll have a conversation. But fundamentally, one of the things that we've done is we've tried to accommodate, a lot of changes or a lot of a lot of customer needs by looking at custom fields. So, hopefully by the addition of custom fields as well as some of these other attributes, it gives you some pretty good flexibility around using the file, and importing that data into FleetCommander. And again, you can see that, dates are in a month, day, year format. You don't need the time, right? So don't feel that you need to put hours, minutes, and seconds in there. We really just care about the date. You have to make sure that whatever your asset identifier is, whether it's VIN or plate or asset name, matches the configuration in the system. Otherwise, you're going to fail. Your codes must match. So when you think about subcategory codes, they have to match the subcategory codes that exist in FleetCommander. Again, codes are codes, right? We're not looking for description. So when you think about creating new subcategory codes, it's always important to make sure that your codes are meaningful and logical in there as short as you can make them. That's why we created a description there as well. Decimal points, we're allowing up to 2 decimal places. So again, it's money. So typically things are in hundreds, not thousands. And then, the important thing is if you get into things like tax or discount or markups, if you don't have data, just leave it as 0. Excuse me. So those are some of the real important tips in terms of, being successful with a file. Now, the next step of this, once you get comfortable with, creating a file and wanting to import it, it's pretty straightforward, to be honest with you. There's a TCO section underneath navigation. So in tools, TCO, and then there's an asset TCO import. And again, once you do that, what it's going to do is going to bring you up a little dialog box where you can go off, you can pick your file. And then once you pick your file, you can see in the second window that it tells you your file name that you selected. So again, you can pick a text or a CSV. And then you basically click next. So again, really, really straightforward. When you do that, it says, you sure you want to do this? And you can say yes to proceed or cancel to stop. If you decide that you keep going, it basically, gives you another little dialog box that says, this is, here's what you've selected. So again, it's asking you to confirm that you want to do this or cancel away from that. And then once you click OK, the system is going to import your file. And you'll see that as you import the file, it's going to tell you how many rows, the file loaded. So it's not going to count the header. So it's going to give you the transactional data about how many rows you actually imported. So again, it tries to be meaningful and giving you the right level of information. Now, the real important thing is maybe things don't go according to plan. So we want to make sure that there's some integrated error handling as part of this whole process. So, when we took a step back and thought about, possible scenarios, where might people have some issues, basically we came up with the following. And again, as you look at things, we're certainly happy to get some more feedback from you as you get experience with the tool. But things like missing invoice dates, that's certainly, a challenge sometimes. People just overlook it. The vehicle doesn't exist for whatever reason. The vehicle, VIN may have been typoed, or the asset name, or the plate. So again, it's important that as you get into this, that you have the right validations going on in here, the right formats. So again, you gotta, as much as people like to do 1-1, shorthand 1-1-22, you gotta remember at 01-01 2022. So again, we're looking at MMDDYYYY. Okay. Invalid subcategory code. So you're trying to import something that doesn't exist in the system, or you're trying to import something and there was no code selected in the import. So these are kind of the things that we've seen. And you can see a little, kind of a little example of, some testing that we did, where we brought in, 6 rows of data, One was successful, 5 contained errors, and you can see exactly what that error handling looks like. So the nice thing about this is that you can take your, file, you can, remove, the successful record and just clean up the other ones and do it again. So that's the nice thing about it. Getting into the next step, in terms of the tool itself. So, as we thought about the tool, and I mentioned at the outset of this, we're really trying to create something that's going to provide a lot of value to you, the end user, in terms of calculating a wide variety of costs and writing them into the, asset TCO table, right, for all of your active assets in bulk. And so, with the 5.9 release, which is forthcoming, we've created the tool, to accommodate insurance and overhead, because those are two of the popular ones that, folks have asked us for. The next one that's coming out is really along the lines of replacement fund, and that's going to be a very powerful tool because again, it gets more into the, how much did you buy it for? What's your net cap? How long do you want to amortize, or how much do you want to, how long do you want to charge replacement fund for? Are there any, percentages? Is there any salvage value? So again, you can start with buying a vehicle, having an in salvage value, and then allocating out, whatever is in between over the life of the asset. So, it's going to be a great little tool that's going to help a lot of folks in terms of, better managing their vehicles, and some of the costs associated with those vehicles. Now, just a couple of things, and that is, when we talk about active vehicles, we're doing these charges for active vehicles. So for those of you that are, familiar with FleetCommander, active means very specific things within FleetCommander. You can see in here, these are the rules as we've defined them. So the asset profile first available date, right? So it's before or equal to the last date of the ending month from the interface. The last available date, is after the first date of the starting month and year of the interface. So we only deal with things that are active. We don't do anything with things that are deleted. So just recognize that and be cognizant of that. Okay. And then getting into the cost allocation tool. So, it's a little bit different. And again, we touched on it a little bit earlier where we, kind of showed this around, setting the asset identifier. But fundamentally, it's underneath, enterprise settings, vehicles, TCO, subheadings, right? And so as you get into the vehicle tab under enterprise, you can see that there's a TCO setting subheader. And again, that's where we're capturing the insurance and the overhead costs. So you can do it globally or you can do it individually. And you can mix and match as, the example here shows, where we want to charge the asset name. We're going to charge a monthly insurance of $15 a month per active vehicle. And then we've got a monthly overhead rate of $2,000, and it's going to be divided equally among all active vehicles. So, it gives you a little bit of flexibility to do it, in a number of different manners. You can charge everything active per vehicle. You can charge some active, some divided, and it can vary based on the transaction type. And again, everything is money. So it's important that as you create these defaults in FleetCommander that you click save, to make sure that you are saving the record, okay, and can apply the charges. When the next step, once you've done this, underneath the tools, there's another section that gets into the TCO, into the cost allocation tool itself. So this is really nice because what it does is it gives you that ability where you can select different allocation periods from month and year drop downs. Excuse me. So it gives you a way where you can, charge multiple periods, single periods. So there's, again, a lot of flexibility there, when you look at the kind of transaction that you want. It does take a little bit of getting used to probably. So you want to be a little bit, cautious on using the tool. we would strongly suggest that if you want to use the TCO tool, that you reach out to us and schedule some time. Only because, if you start putting a lot of costs in the system, it's just gonna, it may end up, storing costs in the wrong places against the wrong periods. So you want to just be a little bit cautious of that. Okay. So it's always important to see, when you're doing this, what period you want to do it. And you can see in this case, the example that we have is, and I apologize, it's a little bit difficult to read. We've got an allocation period where it says, I want to do May of 2020 to May of 2020, May of 2022 to May of 2022. So that means that it's looking at the month of May in 2022 from the first of the month to the end of the month. And we're going to allocate out insurance and overhead. Excuse me. And by doing that, you can see that the system is coming back and saying that, okay, for insurance, we're going to do $15 per vehicle, per active vehicle. And for overhead, we're going to allocate $2,000 against all the active vehicles. So, once you decide, to basically proceed with this, the system will go off and create the calculations in the background for apportioning the overhead to only the active vehicles. So again, it gives you a lot of flexibility here. And you can see that this is the example of the transaction. So how it went off and it said, gee, I want to do, a quantity of 3, at a rate of $15, for a total of $45. And in the overheads case, it basically said, hey, I had a, quantity of 3 and $1.50 and $4.50, based on some of the test data that we did here. So this one was done more from a quarterly standpoint, excuse me, whereas the one above it was a monthly. So, that's why I say you got to be a little bit careful about it, because you do have the ability to do once a month, once a quarter, once a year. So you always want to make sure that when you're allocating cost, that you're allocating costs based on the rules of your organization as it relates to your fiscal operating periods. You don't want to start, back allocating charges for a fiscal period that's closed. That's not really good accounting. So you want to try and stay away from that. Okay. There's nothing, and just to be really clear about that, there's nothing in the system that's going to prevent you from doing that. So it's really up to you to understand what your accounting rules are within your organization, and then how you can allocate your costs. Once you run the tool will also tell you what it did, which is really kind of nice. So you can see that, in this case, based on the asset allocation filters that were selected, we basically said for the first one, here's a May 22 to May 22, we allocated insurance and overhead. And basically it says, hey, the last, in this case, the last date for insurance was allocated to any vehicle on the 13th of the month. And the last day was on, for overhead was the 13th of the month. So that basically said that in this case, the end date that we processed the charge is the date that it used. So, most folks will run this tool at the very end of the month. So they'll use the last day of the month. But if you do use it during the month, it'll allocate charges based on whatever that date is. And then you can see that once you review it and submit it, you'll see that, all of the charges have been allocated properly. So again, just takes a little bit getting used to, lots of flexibility. And then, the next thing that's really important is, apart from charging, right, we've added a feature where we allow you to post the history. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to break up, how we charge things versus how we post things into the period. So, when you look at TCO, anytime you do something, the financials that occurred on a certain date and time shouldn't change over time. So we want to make sure that there's consistency in terms of how they're allocating in that period. And therefore, we've created, this posting utility that allows you to do that. So what the posting utility does is it basically will go off and gather all the transactions. So if you think about this and you say, gee, I want to post my charges for the month of June, because that's the end of my fiscal year. So you could be processing charges in July and they may have June dates on them. And so when you utilize the posting tool, what that's going to do is it's going to go back through all of your expense records in time. And it's going to say, hey, here are the things that happened in June. Let's aggregate these things together and we'll post them into the month of June. So when you run your June report, you're going to have nice, clean June data. Your June data is not going to show up in July, even though you may have created the transaction in July. So it's going to have a June invoice date, or it's going to, or something like that. So those are the things that you just want to get clear in your mind about, the difference between periods and transaction dates, because they will be a little bit different, right? So, the transaction dates are the dates when things typically happened, right? I bought fuel on the 15th of July. I bought, registered the car on the 15th of June. When you do the posting is going to aggregate June data in that posting period, July data in that posting period. So you just want to get comfortable with that a little bit. Okay. In this case, you can see where we start running the posting utility. So the nice thing about it is that the posting utility is going to pull back based on how you've selected your data. Anything that's within that filtered range. So if you said to the system, oh, I want to get transactions between June 1st and the end of July, for example, it's going to bring you back a whole lot of data. Now, the nice thing about it is that you can then decide, which ones to select or not select. Realistically, my recommendation, to folks having done this in the past is I would always try and keep it as clean as possible, because that way you eliminate potential problems where you get costs in the wrong place. So it's always better to try and close on a regular basis. So what that means is you need to pick a period. So you either want to close every month or every quarter. I have run across fleets that frankly would close once a year, and that would be fine for them. The vast majority of fleets would close on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. So depending on how their financials were set up internally. The important thing is that you do want to make sure that you at least close quarterly, because that keeps all of the costs in the right fiscal accounting period. So when you're thinking about how your costs tie back to your company or your entity's general ledger, they should all be relatively in sync. And this is the tool that helps you do that. Okay. And then, again, as you get into this, what the system is doing is it's giving you, prompts for the selections that you picked. So if you look at the activity here, if we selected all the transactions, it basically says, hey, you picked 6 records and there's, $457.54. Do you really want to post these? And you can click OK, or you can click cancel. If you click cancel, nothing happens. If you click OK, it goes off and it basically will post your transactions. And again, ultimately, the system will go through and it'll aggregate your data, and you'll end up with a posting, basically a validation that says, yes, these were posted, right? So in this case, you can see 2 of them were posted, 2 of them are not posted, because, for the period that we posted to, 2 are in period March, 2 are out of period May. Okay. So that's why I say it's really, really important when you do this to understand, the difference between transaction dates and transaction periods, and posting dates and posting periods. Now, getting into this a little bit more, when we talk about upcoming enhancements. So there's a couple of big things that are coming down the pike very, very soon, and that is the replacement fund. So we talked a little bit about that. The next piece of this is we're going to spend some additional time doing, kind of allowing you to have more configurable field names in TCO, so you can call things what you want. And then we're working on a couple of dump reports. So basically, a couple of reports that are going to make life more flexible for, easier for you and more flexible for you, both in terms of getting big volumes of data out, as well as then doing some manipulation about the expense summary. So those are some real important changes that are very, very close to coming out. And with that, are there any questions about today?
In the chat there, Joe.
There's something in chat. Sorry, I didn't have it
No,
up.
I don't see anything in chat.
Okay, I didn't see anything either. Right. Well, if if nobody has any questions, I know we covered an awful lot of ground today, and the thing I want to make sure folks understand is, TCO is it's a great tool for you to use within your operation. Just to recap that, um, if you want to approach it and you want to start thinking about it, I would strongly suggest that you reach out to us, and we'll really spend some dedicated time talking to you and better understanding your organization and how and what you're interested in, because everybody is a little bit different here. We've got a couple of clients that have done some beta with us already on this, and seem to really like the tool. Um, so that's really good feedback. I think for everybody else, it's really just understanding how it can work for you. So we're certainly happy to assist you in any way possible. So if you don't have any questions today, that's okay. Just reach out to us when you're ready, and we'll certainly, schedule some time with you. In terms of Agile and how you can help yourself too is, we've been communicating the FleetCommander user conference. So an awful lot of your peers are already signed up for the user conference. It's going to be in College Park, Maryland, October 4th through 6th, 2022. So we hope that's something that you'll consider joining us at as well. It should be a very interesting conference. Our last one was 2019, and with the, with COVID, we haven't been able to see you, so we'd really love to see you there. And then just a couple of other things, and that is, again, from an Agile standpoint, we provide a couple of different blogs, and postings for you. So when you look at the Agile Client and the Agile Fleet blogs, those are both available to you, as well as a wide variety, white papers, case studies, webinar content under the resources page. So, there's some great material there that's going to help you in terms of thinking about your fleet and positioning your fleet for success. And so that's what, we would strongly recommend. And again, you can certainly also just reach out to us if you've got things that, you're curious about or want to talk about, or what is best practice. That's why we're here. So we would welcome the call. And, obviously, next month, we'll have another workshop Wednesday. So we hope to see you there. Then, again, from your standpoint, all of our clients have, the opportunity to share success. So, it helps you, and it helps your peers. So we would strongly encourage you, where you can, communicate your success. If you want help doing that, let us know. We'll help you do it. It's always good to be able to, show your management, your success, what you've done, how you've accomplished it. There's a lot of learnings for everybody in this business. And so we really enjoy working with our clients to do that. If it's something that you think you want to just, get involved in a case study, we can help you there. And, as I mentioned at the outset, we really do appreciate your, it's a main tool for us in terms of managing our business, and your relationship. So we want to know how you're doing with FleetCommander. We want to know how we can help you with FleetCommander. So, please take a moment or two and, kind of tell us how you are doing and where you need help, and, content that's, certainly of interest to you, because we'll always try and, put together content, for our, for all of our clients. And then lastly, if you can be a reference for us, we'd certainly appreciate it. And if it's something that you think you would like to participate in different webinars or even in the user conference, we'd love to have that conversation with you. And lastly, support. So a lot of you know that we've got a dedicated technical support team, probably one of the best in the business. And so, we strongly suggest that if you do need technical support, they should be your first call. Certainly if you need something that's not support related, you can reach out to either John or myself, on the CS side, and we're happy to help you. And it can be everything from, business reviews to conversations about your fleet, looking at your analytics and trying to determine, is it, are you running well, not running well? What can you do to improve your operation? strategies really for success. So, those are the things that, we would always encourage you to communicate to us about. And then again, we've had some, just to kind of close, we've, if you are interested in doing, something with either TCO or the features, please reach out to us. We're happy to help you implement it. We've been dealing with a lot of clients recently about refresher training because, staff's coming back and restarting operations post-COVID. So happy to, kind of work with you to tailor something. If you are having, issues around the technology side and around your users using vehicles and giving you bad information on the odometers, think about telematics. Not only does it fix, that problem, for good, but telematics can also help you, with additional insights into your fleet around how it's running, how your drivers are using the vehicles, whether they're costing you money or actually your friend saving you money. So there's lots of things to talk about there. If you've got fuel imports, if you're Wex client, the Fuel Master client, you name it, we've done it. So, again, this just gets all of your data in one place. And, last but not least, billing. For some of you that may have not been, to a, recent webinar that talked about some new features and enhancements. FleetCommander now has 5 standard algorithms that you can do for billing. So if billing is something that's on top of mind, let's have that conversation and we can figure out how we can help you get there. And then lastly, just streamlining your operation. If you are dispatching vehicles manually, you've got staff doing it, that costs you money and takes them away from doing other more important work. So, kiosks and keybox are really great tools. Number one, to improve the utilization of your fleet. It's no longer tied to office hours. It's 24/7, 365. And so it really helps you improve the utilization of your fleet. It helps your organization save money because they don't have to pay your drivers for, personal use charges of their vehicle. And so it's all a kind of a win-win from that standpoint. Next workshop Wednesday, September 21st. We hope to see you there. We're going to be talking about dispatching. So whether it's auto or manual vehicle assignments. October, we're going to be on hiatus because that is the user conference. So again, we hope to see you there. And we're going to jump into this in November. We're talking about reservation cancellation tools, some great new features in that. So hopefully we'll be able to have a great conversation there. And that's it today. So, thanks everybody for attending. In the chat, you will find a survey. We really would appreciate you taking a minute to fill out the survey for us. It does help us. It does help us, determine content. It helps us understand how you're doing. So all of those things are great. And thanks so much for your time today and your attention. We appreciate it.